Hello, I'm Chris Slisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Slisher. Hello and welcome to Turning the Wheel. Great to have you back. This is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And spiritual adventure allows me, as I've said many times in the past, to cast a much wider net. And it also allows me to entertain different topics, esoteric fields of study, and to broaden the knowledge pool that we all possess. Astrology brings us a lot of wisdom, but there's a lot of extraneous, alternative kinds of modalities that are also useful in our path forward. So I love to entertain that. A few weeks ago, I had on Jean Mayel, and she's back again today with us today. Thanks for coming back on today, Jean.
Thank you.
And we're going to be talking about much of what you do with your work with regards to tarot, as well as your website, is of a predictive nature. And when we think about prediction, you know, we have those old Hollywood stereotypes in our head of the crystal ball and the witch and the cauldron and all these odd, weird things going on. But we know that predictions work. And we know that there are certain people who are better at it than others. You, for example, are voted #1 psychic on Coast to Coast Radio with George Norrie. Very highly regarded psychic in your world and in your realm of expertise. And I know that that takes a great deal of work on your part, but also a lot of it probably came when you were preloaded and you arrived on the planet. You had this is part of your software. So with that regard, you also go on to sort of help people learn how to develop their psychic abilities. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, to see what is your thought process about that? What do you see as I'm asking a lot of questions at once, but don't worry about it. You pick any one you want. What do you see as the human quality that allows us to have this and sort of, set the stage there?
Well, I started teaching tarot years ago and enjoyed teaching and helping people to discover this intense instant knowing that would happen when they stared into a tarot card. And I also have practice of reading the future, which I've been doing for years, where you meditate on a timeline into the future and you see what pops up. And I was teaching my students that. I was doing it. I started seeing things in the long-term future of our world, mostly around the climate and the earth, that I thought everybody needs to know about this. People need to see this. And so I started teaching my students to do it, and as an instructive tool for my students, I started posting what they were getting online on my website. And at the time, I got 1 or 2 hits a week on my website. And then what happened was some people got a hold of these predictions that were coming true. And the only reason I posted them on my website to begin with was to track them, so we could keep track of what we were seeing and be held accountable to what we were seeing.
Very good
and
point.
Then we would see over time what was coming true, what wasn't, and maybe learn something from it. And I've learned a tremendous amount as a result, but also it's turned my website into the #1 world prediction website.
Wow.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
It was never a plan to do that. But what has come out of it is the group process that we all are hardwired with the gift of prophecy. And there's science.
Prophecy.
Be able to predict or see. Our nervous system can see in advance what's going to happen. It's keeping us alive.
And that's based on stimuli that we pick up?
It must be based on stimuli that we subliminally pick up.
Okay.
And there's research. There's a fellow scientist named Daryl Bem, B-E-M, at Cornell University, who by the New York Times admission is one of the top social scientists of his generation, and he's in his early 80s now. And he's done a lot of work, and there are others who've done a lot of work, that ordinary people can actually see at least a few minutes ahead what's going to happen, even if they don't realize that they're seeing it. Their nervous systems are reacting. Well, what I do is a little bit more expanded than that. I teach them how to see visions, how to pick up in their nervous system feelings and thoughts, and then I go years and years ahead. Like we look at 2017, 2018, I've gone all the way to 2100. And we see visions, I put it up on my website, and then we watch, we see what happens. And we're not always right. It's pretty amazing, the hit rate.
But you probably get within proximity, right?
Oh, for sure. And
when you talk about, say, for example, an environmental thing, you may not be able to say that there's going to be an earthquake in Japan, but you might say, watch the Pacific Rim for something big to happen. So you sort of get into the proximity, and that leads us to there. And I think that's interesting. When you're doing that, and you're helping people discover that, we all have this innate vision. What sort of cues do people need to be attuned to in order to say, is it just a gut instinct thing that we say, I feel like this is going to happen? Or are there actual physical ways that we like, would you get the chills, for example, or would you break out into a sweat and say?
There's certain physiological signs, like chills, like your gut seizing up, like your heart skipping. There are certain signs.
And they need not all be bad, right?
No, you can also get like enthusiasm. For example.
Enthusiasm. Okay, good.
The Greeks use that word. The word enthusiasm means the divine flowing through you.
Okay.
If you're Greek, that's literally what it means. God coming through you. So enthusiasm, when you're like, oh, like this is how I felt when I first picked up a tarot card, and when I first went to a psychic years ago, and I happened to be lucky. I went to a really, really good one. I was like, wow, this is big, this is important. Well, I became very enthusiastic, and that is a sign of something positive. And when children get enthusiastic, I don't care if your 10-year-old says, I'm going to be a basketball player, let them go with that. It's leading them to something positive. They may not end up as a professional player, but it's something in them is guiding them. It's guidance. It's like an inner compass, and it's not all bad. Some of it's good. Then you get premonitions. Then you get dreams. Some people get premonition. One of the most common ones is the phone rings and they know who it is. Or you're thinking about somebody, and the next thing you know, you get an email or the phone rings. That's called telephone telepathy. Actually, it has a name, and there's a scientist who studies it. But what is it really saying to you? What's the big deal if you knew? Well, sometimes it's an appreciation kind of thing. Like, I know somebody sent me an email and said, well, I had a dream that my neighbor was bringing me flowers. And then a few days later, my neighbor brought me some flowers. She said, but what's the big deal? And in that case, I would say your intuition is helping you to appreciate the love that someone feels for you, someone you wouldn't even necessarily think about. And so intuition works in big, small, and even cataclysmic ways. And it's guiding us. It's guidance. It's a compass. It's a fantastic
and it's
thing.
fascinating because I always try to explain this. How does this work? And yet we know it works. It's
in your nervous system.
Yeah, it's in the nervous system.
Yeah, I
think that's got to come from us as we've evolved. I've always been of the opinion that we are a composite of all that's gone before us. So that even if 100 years ago our relatives, from whatever our gene pool is, there's information that moves along with us. It may be suppressed, but it's part of our
Darwinian
baggage.
Advantage. I mean, they've talked about this in the science circles, that the studies show, for example, they do a lot of studies with college kids because those are the ones who are in the universities where they're doing studies. So they found, for example, that college boys are very predictive of sexual opportunity.
Right.
And
that's no brainer.
Keeps the species going. And that females are very predictive of danger because the females were the ones sitting around with the nest and the babies. And so women tend to be much more attuned to anything that could happen that could hurt them.
They're more vigilant.
They're vigilant and very attuned to danger. And so they're better at predicting danger, and boys, anyway, young men, are better at predicting sexual opportunity.
That's why the boys go to war, because they just go blinding where we're sent to war.
I hate to say it, well, it's complicated, but yes.
Yeah.
But it's something that's helped advance our species and keep us going. And there's a lot more that we're aware of other than just sexual opportunity and danger. It's true that the brain defaults to danger because that's how we stayed alive back in the days when the saber-toothed tiger could pounce at any minute.
Right.
But we are also, we can be aware, if we set our mind to it, to what is the best path for my work, the work that I want to do. If you set your mind to it, if you focus on I want to be fulfilled in my work, for example, or I want to meet the person of my dream so I can settle down with. If you focus on that, that's called creative visualization. It's very powerful. Not only does it help you to focus on what you want, but it will set your intuition to open to that when the opportunities are there.
It's almost like psychic flypaper. You want to attract the stuff to you.
Perfect.
And you want to have it come as I want this perfect job, and I want to only work 20 hours a week, and boom, there it is. And I love that when that happens. But it's interesting. We are, when you think about it, getting back to the idea of a composite of our past, we also, I think, much of what we can derive from what our predictions are of the future are based on the cycles of what has happened in the past. As we mentioned in another show, we have this sense of recurrence and stuff like that. But when we think about that in terms of, and it may not always be like you mentioned fight or flight, as if the saber-toothed tiger's going to get us. We don't always respond to that way. It may very well be, how do I find the love of my life, like you mentioned, which is much more
pleasant.
It's much calmer, easier to deal with. How am I going to get that? How am I going to get that house? How am I going to get married? How am I going to have my kids? When should I have a kid? When should I go back to college? What kind of degree should I get? All those things can be derived from this type of predictive quality in an individual, and you use the tarot as the basis for that.
Right.
When you look out
and also just meditating.
And meditating, of course, because that sort of really
even more actually.
Yeah, and I think that more than anything else, what that does is it just eliminates the chatter, if it's possible. I know meditating is not always easy.
It eliminates the chatter so that you can hear the signal, because there's a signal. It's the present moment, the energy of the world, and we can't hear it if we're up here listening to jabber, 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 like a radio going off all the time.
Which means why it's more important now than ever, especially when we have these devices
to shut off the devices.
Well, I mean, I think that we're really doing ourselves a disservice. It is an addiction of sorts. I think there's a mass addiction to them because we fear we're going to miss something. And yet what it's done is that when these first came out, when the cell phones first came out, it was just like, let me know when you get home from school that you're safe, period. Now it's come down to, should I buy this shirt or this is what I had for dinner? Minutia. And it's the minutia that's clouding it's just fogging over it's putting Vaseline on our sunglasses. And so we can't see clearly. And that's a very Neptunian quality, tying in astrologies, I have to. It gives us that sense of illusion, delusion, and we are in a period of time where we're not seeing clearly, which of course speaks to the idea of fake news. It speaks to the idea of what is real. All those things become a byproduct of this obsession, whereby we are losing ourselves in this realm. Now, I love cell phones. I think they do great things. I love being in contact with my children and my loved ones as a result of it. But I do also think that it's there's a point where it's viable and a point where it becomes obstructive. And that's what I'm trying to focus on. But I'm curious, when you mentioned talking about the future, there's got to be some things that have come across your radar. So, not necessarily next week, but, a year,
Long
2
way
years,
off,
3, 4 years down the road, which, and of course, given where we are now in the world, and we see so much, we could say that we're in an unusual time, but I'm sure the Chinese said that 1,000 years ago. The famous phrase is, may you live in unusual times, or exciting times. We live in an exciting time, and that can be both good and bad, depending upon which part of yourself you allow to go which direction. When we look at the future, do we see, I've always used the idea, we've had this conversation of this pendulum, we're going from dark to light and back again. Are we in a state where we're moving towards a greater sense of lightness, I hope?
Well, yeah. And I really feel that I get my conclusions or my information from meditating on the subject and using all my skills. So I don't feel like I have a preconceived notion of, and what I feel...
You're not tainted by your bias.
I try not to be, but everything's subjective in life. Everything that comes through here is going to be subjective in some way. But the more you meditate, the more the more equanimity you get, and so you can be more in the present moment and more open to what's real. And what I have felt after meditating, I was pretty alarmed at one point. I felt like the world was going to hell in a handbasket, and so I started meditating. And I found as I looked further down the road that the pendulum is going to swing and pretty soon into a much more loving, nature-oriented, caring world. That the sort of short of it is it's going to become more matriarchal. That we're moving into a matriarchal society.
Finally.
Now the data, if you look at data,
it may not say that.
No, it
does.
actually,
It
the
does.
data shows, the trends show that girls are getting college educations like 3 times as often as men, that women are rapidly moving into leadership. So it's not 100% equal at this point, but you can see, if you're watching a bunch of players running around in a circle in a race, you can see when somebody's gaining, when they're going to go blow by the others. And there is this feeling, the sense I get is we're moving into a more matriarchal society. And I put this out on my website because I was seeing that, like, long term, we're talking more than a decade away.
Okay.
That women and men who are more have a deep female instinct. They can be very masculine men, but there is the caring approach. They would empathy. They would can care about children. They would care about the welfare of others. That's in the way that women. Not all women, but as a group, we're more wired to do that because we have to take care of the young when they're really, really little.
Right.
So the point is that we're moving in that direction. And somebody wrote to me on my website, because I wrote about that, and I literally have tens of thousands of people coming on my website every day. And someone from India wrote on my website and said that there's an ancient philosophy called the Kali Yuga, which talks about a 10,000-year cycle that goes from patriarchal, it goes through these phases of patriarchy, and that we're moving into this matriarchal society that is coming in the 20s and the mid-20s to late 20s. And that's what I was seeing was going on. And then he also said the Mayans have a similar prophecy, and I didn't have a chance to research that, but it makes a lot of sense.
Just by virtue of the fact that so many different isolated cultures have the similar idea. Makes perfect sense. That, again, speaks to that idea of that collective subconscious, that pool from which we draw. Right. In the end of the day, though, women still need to be women. Women still need to be mothers. We can't have children. Men cannot give birth. So there's always going to be that role there. But do you see that men become more matriarchal as women become more patriarchal, even though we still going to have our basic biological functions?
I don't know. I think that it has to do with power and whether somebody has too much power, whether one gender has too much power. Mm-hmm. And right now, I think we pretty much most people would agree that the male, that it's been a patriarchal world now for thousands of years.
Without question.
And so power can go off the deep end. It can get to be too much. So if we move more matriarchal, I think I don't know. I haven't really looked at it. I feel like what'll happen is it'll become a societal norm to be more caring. Mm-hmm. And when things are a norm, most people on average tend to go along. And so I think that would happen. And also there's more, in a way, more of a positive role for everyone.
I would agree.
Including men. Mm-hmm. It's a society that's going to be more in line with what nature intended. And, if you think about it, Mother Earth. Earth is our mother. Earth mm-hmm. has fed us. And Father, Son, Mother Earth. And Mother Earth right now I think that she has been abused. And so we need to become much more nurturing, not just to ourselves, but to the trees and the plants and all, if we are to survive. And there's a plenty big role for men in that society.
That is an interesting point. I was going to bring that up because in some ways, if women become more empowered and they become more in charge, doesn't the role of the male is not the same in a matriarchal society as the female was in a patriarchal society. So, when we're looking at a patriarchal society, women had a viable role, procreation and everything else that they wonderfully brought to the world. But if the society shifts to a matriarchal society, will the role of the patriarch of the male be as important, or will it be as diminished, or will it just morph into something different?
I think that what we're talking about is extremes here. Right now, we've become pretty extreme patriarchal.
Right, okay.
And I think what's going to shift is women are going to come much more into power. We're going to see women presidents and women heads of state, which we're starting to see a lot more of. And that will shift that extreme away from an extreme. And I mean, in the tarot, for example, there's an emperor and an empress, and they are the archetypal mother and father, and they are equals. They're absolute equals. He has a job to do. He's a builder, for example. He's a doer. He gets stuff done. She has a job to do. She is nurturing. She's caring. And the world that we have right now, many people would argue different ways, but I think that some people would say things have been going away from nurturing, and much more on building companies and building empires. And so I think that's what's going to shift. And so it won't be extreme. It's not like men will be suddenly, not like what it is in a bee colony where the winter comes and they kick the male workers out. It's not going to be like that.
I'm relieved.
And also, I'm not omniscient. You know, I see trends. I see things. I feel we're moving into a more matriarchal direction, and that equals more caring,
right.
and less concerned about building money, and more that the most important thing will be taking care of ourselves and of our society, which doesn't mean that people who do nothing can get away with that or any of that stuff. It just means much more of a concern about humanity.
Right, more of a tribal approach. I think.
Yeah.
A tribal approach
giant Earth tribe.
Yeah, I do too. The tribe is where everyone is taken care of, and it's so logical if you think about it. It's the most logical method of
Life
thinking
force.
you can imagine in the world. It's like, let's live in a tribe. You know, I can't get the corn today, you get the corn today, I'll get the water tomorrow, whatever you want to use for an example. I think it shows us in a much more evolutionary stage. And I think what you're really saying is that we're going to reach a point of balance, which is where we are. If we are imbalanced now, we are approaching a sense of balance. The only thing I have with it is taking so damn long to get there. I wish we could get there faster, but that's me. I'm an impatient Aries. I'm entitled to that. And that's my caveat on that one, or my disclaimer. But getting back to the idea of teaching this, so that I want to be able to have people understand how they can become active players in this.
Yeah.
And so now when you're talking about teaching the ability to be psychic or how to attune those antennae, would they be, and I think I already know the answer, although I don't know, is it for the greater good of humanity, or is it individually focused? Are people, when you teach this, are you looking at how to make your life better or how to make your life better?
It works on all levels at the same time.
Okay.
So, and people who come to me as students and also as clients are mostly, people who come as clients are mostly focused on their individual lives.
Right.
And I basically dedicated my 35 years of giving readings to that, to helping that individual. And then there are the people who want to learn how to read the future for the sake of all of humanity, as well as for themselves. And you know, it's kind of a holographic kind of situation where what nurtures the individual nurtures the whole. They go together.
It's all reflective outward, and yeah, exactly. So the more people that know this, the more people that understand how to do this, the more people who can exercise this muscle, the greater the dilution of that will be. In other words, the distribution of that will be. So that's why it's important. And this may very well be, the steps that you're describing may very well be the steps it requires, that the more the people who know this, then the greater the odds are for achieving this balance, because people are more in line with each other. And I think that has to happen as a result of an event which shocks people in some way or prods them to wake up in a way that says, wake up, we're going the wrong way. And that's what I think the environment is telling us when we see big blocks of the Antarctica melting away. That's the Earth saying, so then that grabs our attention, and then we work towards this as an ultimate end.
Well, and you know, just going back with all these questions you're asking about the individual versus the whole, when you read, like when you are being intuitive, you are looking at what is, you're tuning into energy that includes the whole world. Nature and individuals, the entire world, it's all connected. It's like a big ocean, or like, you swim in a psychic sea, basically.
Right, yeah, I see that.
And so when you're looking for guidance for your own life, you're navigating a psychic sea, which means that what you are tuning into is virtually everything, and also how that is more accentuated in your own life and what you're encountering. And so if you're making good decisions for yourself based on your intuition, those are going to be good decisions for all of life. If they're really good decisions for you, because we are connected to all of life. So there are people out there who make extremely good selfish decisions, and they are intuitive people too, and they get ahead, so to speak. Like let's just use financial, means as a criteria for what it means to get ahead. It doesn't make them happier. The heart has to be happy, and if you're cutting people off, if you're hurting other people and stepping on them, you feel it. You feel it. So what is the best decision for you to make? It's one that is basically open to everything, not just you. So, a lot of it has to do with what you decide to do, has a lot to do with what you have intended, If I'm just focused on material gain, I just want money, there's no problem with that, getting that. There's no problem with getting that. But that isn't what the human heart wants. The human heart wants to be at peace, it wants to have love, it wants to feel safe. And you don't necessarily, for sure, feel safe if you're very, very wealthy. In fact, they've done studies about very, very wealthy people, and they all, in general, they feel like they need another 25% more money in order to feel right. So really, intuition, when you're using it openly to I want to be at peace, I want to be whole, I want to have love. Those are very good goals for happiness. Mm-hmm. Then what is good for you and what you do to get there means that you'll probably be serving a place in the whole world that will help the whole world.
Well, what do you think
is good stuff?
Yeah, what do you think it is that causes people to be opposite of that? Why are people so driven by money in a bad way, or what is it that, and they must feel that. If someone is driven to succeed and willing to step on people like a Bernie Madoff or something like that.
There's a lot of fear in those.
And they go, what is it? Is it fear, or do they not know that they're doing something wrong? They must inherently know that at some level.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when I've gone on retreats where I have sent love and care to people I don't like, people I can't stand, right? People in the political realm that I don't like. I discover generally a person who's either very childlike and afraid, very, very afraid and childlike, or they are that as well as disconnected. And there's nothing good about being disconnected, because it means you're not operating with your whole self, with your whole being. So generally, and I also feel like a lot of people have no clue when they're doing wrong. I've done wrong. We've all done wrong. It's part of us. We're all part of each other. It's just, you're talking about people who we see as being very hurtful to other people.
Right.
And I just think that it doesn't feel good inside of them. But I'm not sure they aren't always aware of it.
Right. Ultimately, they've got to feel a sense of emptiness, a sense of vacuum within them. Something is missing. And I think that sort of feeds into the fear that they are there, and it builds on itself. We've been talking today with Jean Mayel. Her website is Jean Mayel. You can see it on the screen, jeanmayel.com. She does not only tarot readings, but also does a great deal of work with predictions, which is something that's fascinated me. Astrology is a predictive tool as well, and I think that they work very well together. It's been great having you on. I think the idea that the future is going to be bright is all I need to hear, and I'm willing to go with that. So thank you for coming on today, Jean. It's been great to have you.
Thank you, Chris.